I take it we're now live.
Just starting to load. 1 second. Okay.
Good afternoon and welcome to this extraordinary meeting of the Cambridgeshire Police and Crime Panel, which has been called to scrutinise the Acting Commissioner and his response to the COVID-19 crisis. I'm Edward Lee and chair of this panel. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Peterborough City Council's YouTube page. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely. The minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the Peterborough City Council YouTube page. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the panel to keep their video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted, except when invited to speak. The Acting Commissioner, the Acting Chief Executive, Jim Haylett, and the Chief Constable have opted for security reasons to join via telephone, and therefore their faces will not appear on the live stream. When I invite you to speak, please unmute your microphone, ask your question, and then mute it again to allow the relevant person to respond. And also, if you're responding to a question, please follow the same procedure. As with all new arrangements, especially those involving new systems, there is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I will ask your patience if we do so. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, then the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. I'll begin with a roll call of members of the panel so that the members can confirm their attendance. Councillor Ali.
Yes, present.
Councillor Bywater.
Yes, present, Chairman.
Councillor Daunton.
Yes, present.
Councillor Giles, who I believe is going to join us very shortly, so I'll come back to him. Councillor Massey.
I'm here, yes.
Councillor Sharp.
Present.
Councillor Shellens.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Warwick.
Present.
Councillor Warren.
Present.
Councillor Wiggin.
Present.
Independent member Claire George.
Here, Chair.
And myself, Chair Edward Lee. Jane, do we have any apologies for absence?
No, we don't.
Do any interest? Please raise your hand now. Councillor Wiggin.
Thank you, Chair. Just in case it comes up, a member of my household works for Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service.
Thank you. Moving on to public questions. Jane, have we received any questions or statements from members of the public?
No questions were received, thank you.
Thank you. So we move on to the substantial item of this extraordinary meeting, which is monitoring the delivery of the Acting Police and Crime Commissioner's response to the COVID-19 crisis. I would like to invite the Acting Commissioner, Ray Bisbee, to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I would like to say how incredibly proud I am of all the constabulary officers, staff, special constabulary and other volunteers that have dealt with this COVID crisis and worked tirelessly to support communities and to keep them safe, and at the same time still continue to undertake normal and everyday policing work, providing support to vulnerable and victims and tackling offending. I would also like to thank the Chief Constable and his senior team for their leadership during this difficult time. I would also like to thank the panel for providing me with your areas of questioning prior to this meeting. I note a number of the questions asked are of an operational nature. Whilst I can understand the panel's interest in this, I would therefore like to ask the Chief Constable to respond. I would like to remind the panel that they are here to hold me to account and not to hold the Chief Constable to account for operational policing. As you will hopefully hear during this meeting, that despite all the work the Constabulary and my office has done to respond to this crisis, it also shows that normal operational policing has continued during the crisis. The Constabulary has undertaken a considerable amount of proactive work and have had some excellent results around such things as drugs arrests. My office has also assisted in responding to the crisis through redeployment to supporting the Constabulary, to working with partners across the county and also regionally. As I am sure you are aware from my letter to the panel, Dorothy Gregson has been seconded to Public Health England to use her skills as an accredited public health doctor during this time of crisis. I made the decision, with the full support of Dorothy, to ask Jim Haylett to act as my acting Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer to cover Dorothy's secondment. Jim joined the OPCC, or the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, over 6 years ago. He is a senior member of the team and is currently the Deputy Chief Executive. Jim brings with him a wealth of experience in terms of leadership at the local and regional level, also experience of partnership engagement, and has delivered complex projects and collaborations. He was also a police officer for 27 years with South Yorkshire Police. And before we begin, Mr. Chairman, I would like to hand over briefly to Jim, if that's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. It may be helpful if I just set some context. As the panel will recognise, and everyone recognises, obviously, these are unprecedented times, and as you would expect, like many organisations, the Office of the PCC has responded accordingly. So from the outset, the approach that we took was to prioritise two things. One was to support the multi-agency response to COVID, and the other was to specifically support the Constabulary in its direct response. So as a result of this, when the Prime Minister asked everyone to work from home who could, the whole of the Commissioner's office were directed to work from home. This also not only was the benefit of social distancing, but it also freed up the office space that we'd previously used to enable the Constabulary staff who needed to attend work to work so safely at social distancing. As with all organisations, we have had staff shielding and self-isolating, but I'm really glad to report that no OPCC staff have been ill as a result of COVID. So early on, we released a member of staff to become a full-time special constable as part of the Chief Constable's request to all employers of special constables to release their staff, and that member of staff is still working as a full-time special. We also released a member of staff early on to support the Victims and Witness Hub that needed additional support when the lockdown started, and another member of staff to work to establish the multi-agency intelligence cell, which basically was set up by the Constabulary on behalf of the Local Resilience Forum to provide effectively situation reports from all the organisations contributing to the COVID response across Cambridgeshire. And those reports went into the LRS structure so that the groups there could understand the impact that COVID was having on those organisations. A number of staff have also changed their working hours to help meet the current work demands, and as the Commissioner has indicated, Dr. Gregson has been seconded to Public Health. So whilst the normal work of the office has still been carried out, there obviously has been considerable pressure, and some aspects of the reporting that we would normally do has had to be given a bit of extra time. Hence, the annual report will not be delivered as we had normally hoped in the first week of July. But there are still effective arrangements in place in respect of governance and holding the Chief Constable to account, but we have had to rightly recognise and respect the burden that we place on the constabulary in asking them to report to us. So we have taken a more proportionate approach to governance in this period. So as the Commissioner alluded to, given the interest the panel has shown through the questions on operational policing matters relating to the COVID response, on this occasion the Commissioner has agreed, and the Chief Constable has been willing to attend today for him to be able to offer information and clarify any issues. So I would ask the panel that, in view of the current working arrangements and pressures, should there be any questions where we are not able to provide a full response today, that we will get back to you with the information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, and a written response to any questions that you're not able to answer here and now would be perfectly acceptable. Thank you. So I'm going to invite members of the panel to ask questions. I'm going to start with questions which were submitted in writing beforehand. But just to be clear, the purpose of these questions is to scrutinise the Acting Commissioner, not the Chief Constable or the police. And it is entirely at the discretion of the Chief Constable as to whether he wishes to add detail to any answers that the Acting Commissioner or the Chief Executive would like to provide. So I'm going to start with Claire George. I believe you had a question starting with how additional funding was being spent.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, gentlemen. The question, Acting Commissioner, we welcome the announcement of additional funding to support victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence. Could you please provide us with something of an update as to the uptake of this funding and the kinds of activities as well as the geographical locations?
Thank you. Before I respond, Mr. Chairman, can I just make you aware that because of the questions, I have made significant notes, and it may take me a while to go to each question and make sure that I'm following the notes that I've already made.
Thank you. Yes, that's right.
Thank you. So, your question, the details of how these funds were allocated is available on the website, including a 6-page guide. At the moment, as I speak, the process is nearing completion, and we will be publishing the successful bids on our website in line with the Ministry of Justice guidance.
Okay, thank you very much, Acting Commissioner. Are you happy with that response, Claire?
Yes, I'll be able to look at the website and see the detail. Thank you.
Okay. Did you want to follow up with your next question, or would you like to move on?
I'm happy to follow up if that's all right with you, sir.
Okay. Yep.
So I've noted from the report there are comments around protection of vulnerable children. So protecting children from abuse and families from domestic abuse is not just the responsibility of the police. How are frontline agencies working together under the COVID-19 restrictions to proactively support those known to be at risk?
Sorry, I'm just going through my notes to find that question. Thank you. The proactive interventions are particularly easy for identified victims. The disclosure made by the child leads to an investigation and engagement with partner agencies to support, rehabilitate and signpost for continued supportive interventions. What is more difficult are those victims the constabulary are not aware of. Therefore, the Child Abuse Investigation and Safeguarding Unit have been working with frontline staff to educate them on signs and symptoms of abuse, which is key. The constabulary's relationship with schools are hugely important as teachers and staff recognise changes in children and hear information from different sources within the school setting. They have a statutory responsibility to make a referral. That is why the time spent in schools, educational staff, delivering training alongside education to ensure teachers and staff are proactive at recognising signs and symptoms. The constabulary are working hard with the media to get this messaging out to the public. They have done podcasts, Facebook chats, and lots of campaigns to encourage reports when family, friends, neighbours, etc. have a concern about the safety of a child.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner. Claire, were you satisfied with that response?
Thank you. I guess one of the notes of concern, though, is that obviously at the moment, the vast majority of children are not actually attending an educational setting. And I just wonder if there's been any change in focus as a result of that.
Can I take that and I'll get back to you with the details?
Yes.
Ms. Chief, would like to come in on that as well?
Chair, could I, the Chief Constable here, just to give you some reassurance that despite the children being off, we have still made links through the schools because a number of online services are still provided by the educational establishments, linking directly into children whilst they've been off. So the Child Abuse Investigation Team, Adult Abuse Investigation Team and the Domestic Abuse element of the organisation has still been provided information, contacts, how they can speak to police in confidence and other agencies in relation to this time whilst they're away from educational facilities, if that assists you.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. That's very reassuring.
So, Claire, do you still require a further follow-up answer from the Acting Commissioner, or is that satisfactory?
No, that's satisfactory. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Massey, unless you had a follow-up question.
It is a follow-up question. It's kind of related to what we've already been talking about. I'm aware that there's been a lower contact rate with some domestic abuse survivors, for example, with their IDVAs, simply because the...
Councillor Massey, could you just spell out for the benefit of the public what IDVA stands for?
Independent, oh God, I can't remember, domestic, I can't remember. It's the...
It's an independent domestic violence advocate.
Thank you. There we are. I knew it was that. Who provide support to domestic abuse survivors, and normally they would be doing it face-to-face and checking in with them, but they've had to go to phone calls, obviously due to the lockdown, and that contact rate hasn't been great, and that it could be just people who haven't answered the phones or they're not responding to messages. It could be because they can't speak safely, etc. Have the victim support services that the Police and Crime Commissioner work with, have they had similar issues, and what can be done, do we think?
Thank you. The victims are still able to receive support. No services have been stopped through COVID. There's been a need for some of our partners to adapt their responses, recognising the lockdown restrictions, which is understandable. However, victims are still offered support by the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conferences, which is known as MIRAC, and is still in operation. There are sufficient places within refuges, and indeed our third sector partners have been delivering some really innovative responses to support victims and their families, including working with the Cambridgeshire colleges to obtain additional temporary accommodation.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner. Does that answer your question, Councillor Massey?
No, it was more to do with because we've had to adapt how we work via virtually or by telephone, has that had an impact to maybe the response rate that for the victim support services? Maybe the contact rate, I meant.
Thank you. The data, both locally and nationally, does not support this. Domestic abuse incidents have not increased significantly since COVID lockdown was introduced, and are still within the levels the constabulary would assess to be within normal ranges.
Councillor Massey, did you have a... Okay. Perhaps we can monitor that situation at the next meeting, because I think there is possibly certainly anecdotal evidence that there has been an increase in domestic violence, which we perhaps need to look at the data at a later date. Moving on, Claire, I know you have another question which I will come back to. I'm going to move on to Councillor Warren's question, if you'd like to ask that question now.
Good afternoon, Acting Commissioner Ray Bisbee. Councillor Warren here. Just would like to know, what is the policy on providing regular guidance to officers to enforce the social distancing measures in open spaces like parks and skate parks, and how frequently is this guidance issued to police officers?
Thank you. Just going through my paperwork here. Yep. So I've just found it. Thank you very much for staying here. The latest guide attached. The national policy from the National Police Chiefs Council is clear. It is policing by consent using the 4-step or proportionate step response. That's known as the 4 E's. The first is engage and explain first priority. The only legislation that can be enforced and not government guidance, no legislation on social distancing means that it cannot be enforced. It's very hard to enforce something where it would be impossible to do. As soon as it is available or changes, we have a very good structure in place through our comms team, briefings and local dedicated officers on district to ensure key information is conveyed in a way that officers understand and feel confident in their powers. Could I ask the Chief if he would like to come in and answer anything on that?
Yeah, certainly, Commissioner. Chair, and Councillor, just to give you some reassurance in terms of the legislation and the flow of information to officers and staff on the front line, is that daily there's a contact between Martin Hewitt, who's the NPCC, National Police Chiefs Council Chair, with the Home Secretary and Intergovernment, which is a really strong link. On a weekly basis, the regional chiefs, and we're represented in the Eastern region by the Norfolk Chief Constable, Simon Bailey, has a dial-in to that national level in order to understand the national picture. And then that's disseminated on a weekly basis through to us as individual chief constables. In addition to that, the College of Policing are completely linked into the Home Office and to the NPCC in order to be ahead of the guidance, so they can provide information and briefing packs to each individual constabulary. On a daily basis, we held an Operation COVID meeting chaired by myself as the Chief Constable within the organisation. We've now moved that because of the legislation and because of the actual progress of COVID to a Monday and Thursday. And each day we get what is termed the national operation for COVID is called Operation Taller. Operation Taller is the national COVID operation for policing. We, as Chief Constables, get a briefing daily, of which that is again disseminated out through our officers. From the national briefings and from the national slides and guidance and information, that's all fed into our silver cell here at headquarters, which is a multi-agency cell, And then that's nuanced to Cambridgeshire. So bespokely, officers on the front line here in Cambridgeshire get the direct reports direct from the centre, from the Home Office, and then they are nuanced to apply my policing style across the Cambridgeshire county, if that assists you.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Councillor Warren, did you want to follow up on that?
No, but do you want me to ask the other question, or do you want me to leave that one to a little bit later on?
I think it relates, so do you want to go on to the next question?
We were talking about the house party, wasn't we? So do you want me to answer that question?
Well, also the large-scale gatherings and street parties. Yeah. Yes, if you'd like to go ahead, yeah.
So, Councillor Risby, just a follow-up. Also, we're dealing with a lot of queries around house parties, and just want to know the Commissioner's viewpoint and what he's doing to support the police on small gatherings, but over the size of the minutes for house parties. So gatherings of 6 to 10 people in house parties. And what is the Commissioner doing to support the police on this?
Thank you. I think this is more of an operational question. I would like to ask the Chief Constable if he would like to make any comment.
Yeah, certainly, Chair and Councillor, just to add, I think it's fair to say, and last night was no exception, that the change in legislation and rules and guidance has been far-reaching since the beginning of lockdown. And when we've gone from a period of very clear clarity about lockdown and why you shouldn't, the reasons why you can and what you can't leave your house for, they have since been, as we know, relaxed. In relation to the latest amendments to the health protection legislation, that applied some weeks ago to gatherings. It was 6 or more people who were allowed to gather with the social distancing in open spaces, but not back gardens, and certainly not within your household. I'm not sure where the information around 10 people in a house party has ever come from. House parties have never been part of the legislation, nor the figure 10 to my mind. It's always been 2 initially, and then it's been 6 in recent amendments to the guidelines. So in relation to what we're doing, as the Commissioner's already outlined, the policing approach has been across 4 E's, and the last one of that is enforcement. The first ones are around explanation, encouragement, in order to provide every opportunity for the persons to comply. So we do get a lot of information and especially in the early days of COVID and the lockdown period, of people going around people's houses, gathering in people's houses. And of course, we can't react to every opportunity and every report into the organisation. But what we do is map them, prioritise them, and then deploy officers or PCSOs, police staff, to those particular instances. So as the lockdown procedures have been de-restricted to a large degree up until the last 24 hours, as we heard last night by the government, this is becoming increasingly difficult to police, and more responsibility about personal responsibility is the mantra from central government. In relation to social distancing, there is no legislation which we can apply for the 2-metre rule. That is not part of legislation, that is part of guidance. So in terms of gatherings, we can only apply legislation to the number of people and in relation to the numbers of households which gather within that party of 6.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Acting Commissioner, I just wondered if your office has received any correspondence, either complaining or supporting the police's response to enforcing the legislation around COVID-19.
Yes, we've had some conversations with the Chief Constable, but there have been a few questions coming in from people to ask about it. But it's very, very small in number.
Okay, and does it give you any impression of the public's how the public is reacting to the police's actions in this respect?
At the moment, from the information I've been receiving, is the public generally have been very compliant with all the relevant legislation and requests and the directions that the government are putting out and suggestions and advice. So at the moment, I've not seen any real issue with that.
Okay, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Chair, if I could just add this to Chief Constable, is that I fully support the Commissioner. In terms of complaints into the organisation, they've been relatively low. The number of enforcement fines which the organisation has issued is relatively low compared to other forces. It stands around 132, which is really a reflection of the cooperation we as an organisation have received from our communities, and particularly the hard work of my officers and staff and the engagement of communities to comply with the legislation and restrictions.
Thank you, Chief Constable. That is very reassuring. Councillor Warren, did you have any further questions on that?
No, thank you, Commissioner, for those answers.
Okay, moving on, Councillor Bywater, I believe you had a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Firstly, I'd just really like to say in these unprecedented times, pass on my thanks to the Acting Police and Crime Commissioner and to the Chief Constable to thank our non-operational staff and our operational staff in these really testing times for everybody. I know there's been a lot of work from a multi-agency point of view taking place in the background, so I just want to make that public that I pass on my thanks. My question is, have child abuse reports increased since the implementation of the Coronavirus Act 2020, and has Cambridgeshire Constabulary seen any increase in children safeguarding?
Councillor Bywater, first of all, I would like to thank you for your sentiments. There has been a lot of work done in the background and we are working as best we can, so thank you for those sentiments. The response is that this is an operational question, which I'll let the Chief Constable answer, if that's okay with the Chief Constable.
Yeah, that's fine, Commissioner. Just in relation to child protection investigations, this year compared to last year, we've actually seen a 19.1% decrease in investigations come through the organisation. And in particular, those flagged with child sexual abuse onto the system, that's again shown a reduction of 13.2%. Clearly, the work of the Child Abuse Investigation Safeguarding Team is intrinsically linked to schools. We know, as we always do, that the schools have not been present with the children present, and that is fair to say where the majority of our safeguarding referrals and instances come from into the organisation. I was personally out with the child abuse investigations in the north and the south, and there was a reflection in the early part of COVID lockdown that the instances and the referrals had slowed up considerably into the organisation and into the multi-agency discipline teams. However, in the last few weeks, we have started to see that pick up. The other aspect of child abuse is not just the numbers, but also the severity of the referrals that are coming through. It's fair to say, although the numbers were down, the severity of the investigations that my officers have to investigate has slowly increased over this period of time. But in general, in answer to your question, there has been a reduction in child protection investigations from this year to last year, and indeed over the lockdown period.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Councillor Bywater, does that answer your question?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Ali, I just wondered whether Councillor Murphy passed on questions that he submitted to you. Councillor Ali, you're still, oh yeah, you're unmuted now.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, just we're a technical hitch. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I think they're probably related to some operational issues. I'll just share them. But before that, I just want to thank everyone involved, because I've been getting some very positive comments about the work that the constabulary is doing in terms of engaging with the communities. You know, there are lots of challenges, but I'm very grateful for the face-to-face contact that people do have. So thank you very much for that. And it's really, I mean, is there any explanation about the reporting of a number of violent crimes in Peterborough recently, and have there actually been a significant increase in those during the lockdown?
Commissioner, do you wish me to take that question?
Yes, again, this is an operational question, and if you're happy to take that, Chief Constable, I'm happy for you to do that.
Councillor Ali, just in relation to Peterborough and the north of the county, violence against a person operates within certain parameters of which we appear as normality, for want of a better word. And on a daily basis, the violent crimes sort of range between 37 per day and to a lower limit of around 21 per day. The first is the context about violent crime, is that violent crime covers a multitude of offences, from abusive telephone calls comes under the violent category, right up to homicide. So despite the numbers, you have to put a narrative around these sort of figures. But it's fair to say that during the lockdown period, from the start in the sort of latter part of March, violent crime within the northern area of the county took a dramatic downfall. That started to rise a couple of weeks ago to around about the 25th of May, when we saw a particular peak. But actually that peak in violent crime is still within the bounds of those normality figures, which I articulated at the beginning of my answer. In relation, again, comparing with child sexual abuse, you'll be aware, Councillor Ali, I'm sure, of a certain number of incidents which have occurred within Peterborough of a serious nature, including homicide. Those suspects were quickly arrested by some excellent work locally through our neighbourhood teams and the major crime unit to provide early arrests and charges in relation to those serious offences. We are facing a threat at the present time in the northern area of the county through some serious criminality, but again, arrests have been made within the last 24 hours in relation to that significant threat. And just be reassured that I and Superintendent Andy Jipp and the neighbourhood team's response and investigations team are keeping a close eye on any violent crime. But the short, in summary, answer to your question is no, we have not seen a significant increase in violent crime in the north of the county, Peterborough, over this lockdown period.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable, for that. You know, the only further comment that I would add in to your response is that, you know, quite often people who make the complaints are concerned about the communities are not always kept informed. And I know it's a challenging time as well, but I would just request that if communities in the affected areas can be reassured, that I would be grateful for that.
Councillor Ali, as always, your observations are noted, and just to give you some reassurance that with every crime report, we enter into a victim's crime contact with the individual of that crime. Now, I accept that that's in relation to an individual update, but again, reassurance, the force's performance into victim crime updates has increased considerably over the last month period, with some concentrated performance effort within the organisation. But additionally, in terms of the proactive work of our communications department through our neighbours and social media district colleagues, then that has also been done. But we can always do more, accept your points, and I'll feed that back into the organisation.
Wonderful, thank you. Through you, Chair, if I may ask another question. It's regarding recruitment. I remember there was some talk of reducing the PCSOs and also trying to increase the police constables. Has that been impacted upon in any way during lockdown?
Thank you, Councillor Ali. This is a matter for the Chief Constable to decide upon regarding his operational need. So again, is the Chief Constable happy to answer this?
Yes, Commissioner, no problem at all. Just in relation to recruitment, we've had no issues in relation to police officer recruitment during this lockdown period. We've got a significant number of applicants awaiting entry into the organisation, and it's pleasing also to see the representation of our communities within that recruitment profile is increasing. So over the last 12 months, our BME representation has increased to just under 5%, and in terms of the last 12 months, our BME recruitment has just shy of 10%. And as you would know, the population BME representation is around about 9.7% across the organisation. So being representative of our communities is of vital importance. So recruitment has not stopped. Indeed, the pass out, the finalisation of new recruits onto the streets has not stopped either, with a number of pass out parades which I and my Deputy Chief Constable have attended. And in relation to a bit of a national picture, then I've updated at this meeting before on our requirement to meet the national 20,000 uplift proportion. We met our target quite admirably in the 31st of March by recruiting above the 21 officers that we were required to do, and the projections going forward to March the 31st, 2021 of the additional 41 officers is again on track.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, can I intervene?
Yes,
please? Councillor Ali, I can tell you, today I'm in my office, which is one of the few days that I've been in the office over the COVID period, and I was happy to see that we have a new cohort of Police Now recruits that were in and doing their training, and it was fantastic to see them and to see that they are looking forward to finishing their training and getting out and working with the force that's out there at the moment to help them and to be helping the public.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Claire, George, can I come to you with your question about the incidents with frontline workers?
You can. Thank you very much, Chair. Not a pleasant topic, I'm afraid, but we've seen some national incidents where frontline workers, not just police force, there's been some rail workers that have actually been spat at by people claiming to have COVID-19. And for some of those people, it's had quite a devastating effect on their health, and one or two have actually lost their lives as a result of that. Are you able to tell us whether there have been any such instances within the constabulary area, and whether adequate PPE is available and in use by frontline staff to protect them from this type of disgusting behaviour?
Thank you for that question. The constabulary have got personal protection equipment and guidance to support them when they require it. They also have spit hoods, which are deployable if a person does show signs of going to spit or has a history of spitting and is being aggressive. The cases that come in are actually triaged, and the officers, where possible, are given the history if somebody is known to have a history of spitting. There have been 2 noticeable assaults which have resulted in jail sentences.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Claire?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. You, Acting Commissioner, you made a reference to spit hoods. This is possibly not the forum to bring this up, but actually I wondered if the constabulary has investigated perhaps more humane alternatives, such as just wearing a visor, such as a hospital worker might wear, because that would still allow them to see, whereas, as I understand it, wearing a hood does not allow the perpetrator to continue to see. But anyway, I don't expect you to comment on that now. I'll just leave that as an observation.
Could I just hand this over to the Chief Constable, because the use of spit hoods is got national guidance. So if the Chief Constable would like to answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, Chair, the use of spit hoods is relatively rare within the organisation, despite, as the Commissioner has said, the increase in spitting incidents has increased, certainly over the lockdown period. The spit hoods are applied to individuals, not the officers, in relation to their aggression and the possibility of them spitting on officers. As the Commissioner said, they have been risk assessed. They are nationally procured and issued to various officers. Each one of them is subject of a debrief if they are used. The use of visors it wouldn't be appropriate in terms of the safety of the individual we're trying to arrest or restrain, or indeed the officers. So these have been subject to much controversy over the years, but it's fair to say they're rarely used within Cambridgeshire, but when they are used, they're subject to a debrief on why they were used. It's annotated within any custody record so that there is full audit trail of why they were used, how long they were used, and indeed the guidance around their use of constant observations of that individual arrested or restrained is quite stringently adhered to.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification, Chief Constable. I think that takes us to the end of the questions that were submitted, other than my own in writing. Do any members at this point have any questions they would like to put to the Acting Commissioner? Councillor Daunton.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to ask what effect, if any, COVID-19 has had on the disposal of police assets.
Thank you for the question, but this hasn't actually had any kind of effect on assets at all.
Okay, so just to be clear, none of the transformation programme plans, for instance, with the Southern Policing Hub or any other police stations, none of those have been affected by the COVID-19 and being delayed, or is that, just to be clear on that?
Thank you. There is some information which is embargoed at the moment, but it will be coming out on Monday.
Okay, and that will be as a press release or a report?
That will be in the form of a press release and accompanying documents.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wiggin.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Commissioner. Thank you for being with us today. I know this is a difficult time for us all, so we do appreciate you and your staff and the Chief Constable joining us today. I wanted to ask about the approach to larger scale gatherings. There's been quite notable incidences in Peterborough, such as the large street party in Sheepwalk, and comparing that to other actions taken by the police, such as the dispersal order for the planned party on the Embankment. Do you think that the right approach has been taken in terms of balancing the 4 E's, and is this in line with your overall strategic vision of how we should police Peterborough and Cambridgeshire?
Yes, I'm happy that the 4 E's are in line with what should be happening. We have covered most of this already. I just wonder if the Chief Constable has anything he wishes to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. I think the first thing is to draw a line between what is in relation to specific intelligence around disorder or antisocial behaviour, which was of particular relevance to the embankment, where we worked with the Peterborough Unitary Council and the County Council in relation to a dispersal order. So that was a relation not particularly around the lockdown and the social distancing guidance and the health protection legislation, although of course that was in our rationale of our thinking, but that was more specifically in relation to intelligence and information we'd received of disorder occurring at that location. The second part was the distinction behind social gathering and mass gatherings, as we saw particularly last weekend nationally and here in Cambridgeshire in terms of Black Lives Matter protests. And again, that's a real careful balance between allowing freedom of expression, balancing that against public disorder, and of course against the backdrop of where we are within COVID-19 and social distancing and the threat that's posed by the virus. So on all of those occasions, I had a command structure in place, which was not only consulted with local authorities, but also in relation to the local communities, in relation to the proportionality of those of that policing style that we instigated. I was more than happy with the command structure and also the results of that, and sort of pay tribute really to the people who did peacefully express their opinions last weekend across the county in comparison to some other areas nationally, but also in relation to the closure of the embankment and our work with Peterborough in terms of enforcing of the dispersal order, which led to no incidents of disorder of notable effect over that weekend.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Does that answer your question, Councillor William?
Partly. Thank you for the response on the embankment and the Black Lives Matter protest. That's very comprehensive. Just with regards to the incident I mentioned at Sheepwalk, obviously I know that in itself is an operational issue, but has the Commissioner received any complaints about the way that was dealt with? Because I've seen, certainly on social media and in the local media, complaints that the response wasn't quick enough or stern enough for some people's likings. Just wondered if there had been any feedback on that.
Thank you, Councillor Wiggins. At the moment, I am not aware of any complaints that have come into my office about that incident. But if we do, we can get back to you and let you know.
I think possibly, Councillor Wiggin, this might be something you want to take up with the Acting Commissioner outside of this meeting, as it is a very specific local issue.
Yeah, that answers great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Moving to Councillor Massey, please.
Yes, the Chief Constable's already preempted my question in regards to whether the police are happy with the response to the protests, particularly the Black Lives Matter protest. And I will just add to that to say that I was particularly impressed by how the protest was well managed, both by the organisers and by the police, who kept a very, who was very distant but definitely involved. It was really, really brilliant to see so many people socially distancing and being able to have their voices heard. So on that matter, then I will go to a different question. And how has the work on county lines changed due to COVID?
Sorry, I'm just going through my notes to bring that up. this is actually an operational question which I can't get involved in. So I think this is something that is up to the Chief Constable if he wishes to answer this question.
Yeah, Commissioner, thank you for that. I think during the lockdown period, we will always have incidences of county lines and drug dealing. But what this has given us an opportunity is to exercise some considerable proactivity in relation to tackling this issue. And since the lockdown began, there's some highlights of the work that has been done by the teams across the organisation. Is particularly in relation to county lines and drugs, is that since the lockdown period began, we've made over 113 arrests. In relation to heroin, crack, cannabis, street value of in excess of £5 million. The actual early part of the lockdown period provided us with opportunities because not only were these dealers at home, but also they stood out on the streets for us to take some proactive action against these individuals who target vulnerable people across the county. So we haven't seen a considerable shift in the operation of county lines. What you will have noticed, or hopefully the portrayal of what I've just outlined, is some considerable increase in proactivity in tackling county lines, particularly those who prey on vulnerable people across this county, and more so with the links back into the metropolitan areas nationally of where these drugs stem from.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Councillor Massey, do you have any follow-up on that?
No, it was comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tin.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Hopefully, Acting Commissioner, one of you can just answer a question for me on behalf of my residents, some of whom have raised this with me. Obviously, we've seen protests, and the protests in our county have been very respectful. They've been handled well. The protesters have all acted properly, and I think that's to their credit. However, we have seen in other places, and indeed on the other side of the world, protests turn into disorder, and in some places into arson and looting and the like. Obviously not here so far. Some people have said that's because the police in some places have been instructed to take a gentle touch with people who are doing these illegal activities. And I think we would just like some reassurance that if in the unlikely event that that were to spill over here, we would see a robust response. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Can I just say that I was also very pleased to see that the protests taking place in Cambridge and Peterborough over the weekend were carried out peacefully and respectfully. However, I think, again, this is an operational question which I would have to defer to the Chief Constable if he's willing to take that.
Thanks, Commissioner. I think that's a really difficult question to answer because I think, as you've seen, then various protests and disorder have occurred across the nation, and the policing response has been different. And it's been different because they have to balance what's happening in front of them at the time and based upon intelligence. So we could use the words of zero tolerance or robust response in relation to disorder. But as some of my colleagues have expressed, that's a very difficult decision at the time based upon not only how does that escalate very quickly into large-scale disorder, or actually puts the safety of the people who are attending the event, or indeed our own officers and staff, at risk. Within the public order domain, there are other options for which evidence gathering techniques occur, and you can make arrests later. And sometimes that is a very delicate decision of a commander to actually intervene at the time or not. What I can say is that before every public order situation or planned operation, shall we say, there are levels of acceptability which the commander sets out within his teams or in her teams, of which is acceptable behaviour, undesirable activity, or actually it's just not acceptable at all. And so there are various tipping points, as we describe, of which police intervention will take place. So what I can't guarantee is that if there's criminal damage happening across the county or large-scale disruption, shall we say, we would take robust action at the time. I would hope that we maintain public order as we've seen over the last few weekends by policing by consent, by the good early cooperation of those attending protests, the policing style which we always adhere to here in Cambridge, and we come to some arrangement about how those protests are facilitated in the light of Human Rights Act. But we will always take a line of where criminal damage or other offences are committed, then they will be followed up at an appropriate time. Whether that's at the immediacy of happening in front of officers or at a later date will be a decision of the commander, balancing the wider scale public peace of which they are faced with at the time.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Did any members have any follow-up question on this specific area? I don't know, so we've got 3 waiting, but if there are different questions, then I'll come to them in order. Okay, I'll move to Claire, Councillor Daunton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is probably an operational question, but it concerns speeding. During the lockdown, of course, there have been fewer cars on the road, but those cars on the road have been driving at significantly higher speeds, and this has particularly affected villages. I wonder if either the Acting Commissioner or the Chief Constable could comment on the police response to that.
Thank you. Again, this one is operational. I am aware of it, but I would ask the Chief Constable if he would like to respond to that.
Commissioner, thank you. Speeding is illegal, whether it occurs during lockdown period or not, and we will enforce that. And we have seen, as has been reported in the media, enforcement activity on vast excessive speeds. Whether the road is clear or not, that is set for a purpose of not only in terms of the safety and the competence of that individual driving, but also the actual the restraints of which the car is built, for want of a better word. Those cars are not designed to travel at that speed, whatever the person behind the wheel thinks. And so they cannot anticipate that no one will be on the road. We have taken exactly the same action as we would out of lockdown period in terms of enforcement. Yes, of course, in the early days of lockdown period, the roads were relatively clear, which gave the opportunity for people who thought they could get away with it to get away with it until we enforce those regulations. We will always take, and the road policing and my officers will always take the appropriate action, lockdown or no lockdown, in terms of breaching speeding regulations. We try to get out into the villages, and there is a good link with the safety partnership in terms of targeting those villages that report concerns to us. And again, my officers and neighbourhood teams in particular have been out through the villages during this period to try and reassure the public, not only about speeding, but about antisocial behaviour and other elements which come through to my office.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Can I move to Councillor Warwick?
Hello, thank you. So first of all, thank you very much for all the hard work that all the police forces have been doing. It's been incredibly difficult when people obviously got the information, requests and everything else. So I think it must have been really, really difficult for everyone. My question is probably going to be for the Chief Constable. So I know the large proportion of missing from homes are from young people, and I'm quite interested to know if that's been impacted by the COVID-19 lockdown. And if so, how has it changed, please?
Yeah, in answer to your question, the number of missing person reports has decreased over lockdown. Unknown why, there's various assumptions as to why that's occurred, but the reports into the organisation has actually decreased over lockdown period on missing person reports. And of course, we work tirelessly with our partners in order to understand the reasons why people go missing, vulnerability or problems at home, threat of violence, mental health, depression or pressures of being a young person in this day and age. So the numbers have actually decreased in terms of missing people. So it hasn't really significantly altered our approach and we still have the full cooperation and availability of our partner agencies when we deal with missing people.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Warwick?
It does, thank you.
Okay. So moving to Councillor Ali, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reflect back on an earlier question and response from the Chief Constable regarding the Black Lives Matter protest here in Peterborough. The question is that a lot of young people were involved in organising that particular event from our diverse communities here in Peterborough, and a large proportion of those attending were young people as well. And I was very, very impressed with the engagement the police had with the organisers, and it went peacefully well. The question is that, I want to ask the Chief Constable that, the time invested in talking to the organisers, that really paid off. And if any lessons could be learned from what we did in Peterborough and how others did in other parts of the city where things really didn't work out that well. I'm quite proud of the way that it was all handled in Peterborough, certainly. But I'm just quite interested in terms of, no doubt the Chief Constable has had some communication with his colleagues up and down the country as well. And I'm sure others can learn lessons from the way that we approach the whole event. Thank you.
Councillor Ali, thank you very much for those comments, and I'll ensure that they're passed on to my team. So I think the way it was policed, not only in terms of our side of the bargain, in terms of the way we put a public order operation around the protest last weekend, the command structure and the policing style which we adopted, but additionally in terms of, my thanks to the people who did attend, who did peacefully protest and make their point. Both that combination led to a peaceful weekend. I think there are lessons to be learned in terms of what we call protest liaison officers, which are specially trained officers, particularly in pre-planned public order events. Their job specifically is to liaise with the organisers, with the people who are going to attend, well before the incident, before the protest is actually planned and before the day, in order to understand what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, how long the protest, how many people, what is the sentiment, how can we work together to ensure that such issues, such emotive issues, are actually brought to the fore. And I think that was a perfect example of how that all worked. With any public order incident, with any incident, actually, we hold a debrief, and those, Councillor Ali, are fed back into the national public order regime, so that people can learn from us, and so too we can learn from other people around good practice in relation to public order. So hopefully that will be, a way forward, and that should we see, and I've no doubt when we see other protests across the county, not just in Peterborough, that we can again put on a peaceful policing operation.
Thank you very much.
That's a very interesting, useful insight. Thank you, Chief Constable. As we have no other members asking questions at the moment, can I move Acting Commissioner to the questions that I submitted in writing? The first of which was about the Ministry of Justice increasing data requirements from all agencies. Are you able to describe what those increased data requirements are?
Yes, if you just wait a minute, I'll get my notes and be able to give you the information. So could you repeat the question again, just so I can get the correct question?
So it refers to item 5.3 in the relevant BCB report, as the Ministry of Justice has increased the data requirements from all agencies during lockdown. And if you could describe what those data requirements are.
Thank you. Initially, my office was asked to facilitate fortnightly meetings. However, they've now gone to monthly, data returns. and they're from victim support services funded through my office. This included information on demand, staffing capacity, waiting lists, if relevant, and average length of time spent supporting victims. This information was enabled the Ministry of Justice to monitor need in each local area.
Okay, and has that additional data helped you in designing or adapting the victim support services in Cambridgeshire?
Thank you. Again, I'm just looking through the notes. I do apologise for this. Yeah, this is more for Ministry of Justice purposes rather than my purposes. So that's why it was done.
Okay, all right. So my second question was about the whether a decision has yet been taken as to when jury trials will resume, and whether this is the delay is having an impact on the police in terms of preparing evidence for court cases. Are you still there, Acting Commissioner?
Sorry, I forgot to press the. Sorry. I chaired the Criminal Justice Board on the 3rd of June 2020, where this was discussed. I was informed by the cluster manager that the matter of when jury trials restart is one the Crown Courts to determine. We could, however, expect to see our first jury trial taking place as early as July. However, this is dependent on a number of factors that they have to take into account.
Okay, and are you aware of it having any negative consequences for the constabulary?
Yes, I mean, there are backlogs, and so those backlogs will have an impact eventually.
Okay, and so the written question that I submitted was about the recovery plan in relation to that backlog. If you had any further comments on that.
Thank you. The office is working with a recovery group that has recently been formed under the Criminal Justice Board, and relevant plans and updates will be provided to the board going forward.
Okay. So moving on to my next question, which related to communication channels being used to communicate with Neighbourhood Watch and the Acting Commissioner's ECOX distribution list were cited as two of those channels. I wondered if either now or in writing afterwards, you might be able to provide a comprehensive list of the communication channels that are being used to communicate advice and guidance to members to the public.
Thank you. Communication channels used include media releases, which are posted online on my website and distributed to local media, statements and responses, interviews, updates, updating the public on emerging issues, at times with the Chief Constable, social media posts via Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, including blogs, contributions to National Association of Police and Crime bulletins, and also a seasonal newsletter reaching just under 20,000 people, partnerships, communications, campaigns, often with partners and crime prevention events. I can provide a list to you at a later date if you wish.
I think it would be useful, in particular, in terms of how effective that communication is at reaching people who are not actively interested in the police. So people who aren't necessarily subscribed to blogs and social media, which obviously is the vast majority of the population, but that population does need to be kept informed about what they can and should be doing at the moment, obviously during lockdown. So it's really just to get a feel for how effective that communication strategy is.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. We will get back to you, to the panel with the information that you've requested, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. And the final question that I had was about the year-end procedures are ongoing. And I think Jim Haylett mentioned the delay to the annual report. I just wondered if you could give us any feel for what your current target date is for producing the outturn accounts and the annual report.
Thank you. The draft accounts are complete and available to be viewed on both my website and the constabularies. Nationally, the statutory deadline for accounts to be completed has been extended to the 30th of November 2020, and that's due to COVID. However, we are working with the external auditors for our accounts to be finalised to use deadline of 31st of July, but some of the areas such as pensions may be delayed, and as we have to wait on the County Council Local Government Shared Services, the LGSS as they are known, they will be signed and completed by the 30th of November. So the September, hopefully, annual report.
Okay, that's very helpful, thank you. Okay, well, that's was the last of my questions. Are there any questions that other panel members would like to ask at this point? Okay, well, that looks as if we've come to the end of the scrutiny session. So I would just like to thank the Acting Commissioner, the Chief Executive and the Chief Constable. Thank you very much for joining us. And to pass on the thanks of all of the panel to all of the work that you have done and all of your staff and officers. And we wish you the very best in continuing the good work that you're currently doing. Acting Commissioner, I see you just wants to say something before we close the meeting.
Yes, I would like to thank the panel for asking me here today. But today, the Chief Constable has actually been put under quite a bit of pressure to answer the question. So I'd like to publicly thank him for coming today. He's not obliged to come, but thank him for coming and taking those questions. And also Jim Haylett and the rest of my team and the force for all the work that they've been doing, and yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, to echo the thanks to the Chief Constable. Thank you very much for sparing the time to join us. It is greatly appreciated to have the additional detail, and I realise that we are often straying into operational areas, but it does help understand the strategic context in many cases. And I think it would provide great reassurance to the public to know that you are actively engaged with these scrutiny sessions. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so with that, I think we can draw the meeting to a close. And just to make sure that there's no further business to conclude, we have a date set for a panel meeting on the 1st of July, which will be confirmed shortly. Unless there's any issues that members would like to raise before we close, then I'd like to thank you all very much, and thank you very much to the support officers for organising this and making it possible and allowing it to run so smoothly. So thank you very much, everyone.